Thanks, Tommy. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for having me. So, the theme of this year's conference is Minds in Motion. And I suppose I've been reflecting a lot in the last few weeks, and I've been thinking about coming here today, and I'm thinking about that in the context of what's happening in the world. So I want to start off by thinking about that and thinking about being mindful of people around the world and mindful of each other as well here today. So as Tommy said, my name is Sharon Lambert and I'm a psychologist. I work in University College Cork. But before I became an academic, I used to work in frontline services in the community, and then I fled into academic circles. So when I worked in the community, I worked with young people experiencing social exclusion and their families. And in the university, my research and my teaching revolves around trauma-informed service design. So how we design services that understand the impact of trauma and how trauma impacts on thinking, behaviour and learning. So what I mean by trauma is a unique individual subjective experience. So lots of people here may have experienced adversity, and some of you will have experienced those events as traumatic. Other people may have experienced similar issues and may not have experienced those as traumatic. Even within psychology, psychological trauma isn't very well defined. When we see something really horrific, that's an obvious trauma. But there are other things that are experienced as traumas. So those issues, experiences, and events that chip away at somebody's sense of well-being. So examples include prolonged exposure to racism, living in poverty, and exposure to other events or experiences that can cause you to be socially excluded. So, for example, young people who use drugs can often find themselves very socially excluded. So when I think about trauma, and I think about trauma-informed service design, what we try to do is design services that understand that people who have experienced the most adversity in our communities, the people who need us the most, are the ones who struggle the most to access services. And you'll often hear people talking about hard-to-reach young people. There are no hard-to-reach young people. There are services that need to redesign themselves. And I was thinking about, how young people can present. So sometimes we can describe young people as being challenging, when often they're just experiencing terrible sadness. It's really difficult at the moment. We're living in very challenging times. We're witness to war, climate crisis. There's millions of people around the world being displaced. There's political instability, increasing inequality. There are people who are experiencing hate and discrimination because of their race, their gender, their sexuality, their religion. And often that's happening in the context of spaces where there's a lack of empathetic political leadership. I'm finding that really difficult to watch. It does make me feel overwhelmed. And then if you work in a community service, you're also trying to support individuals within communities who are experiencing their own adversity. I know when I worked in the community, I often found myself feeling overwhelmed, and I often worried that I didn't have the tools or the skills. And I know that some of you here today as well sometimes hear the most horrendous stories from people, and you feel overwhelmed, and you worry if you are equipped, but you are. Because you heard the speakers talking this morning about One Good Adult. So Jigsaw has loads of research that talks about the importance of one good adult. So if you took the time to come here today, and you're going to stay for the next couple of days, you've done that because you care, because you're one good adult, which means that you are enough. The World Health Organization and the United Nations this year in 2023 have asked us to consider the way we think about mental health and how we design mental health services. They've argued that our mental health services think about diagnosis, symptoms, and medication, and that we've forgotten the context that people live in. where you live, the environment in which you're in, your socioeconomic status, your gender, your ethnicity, all of those things impact on your mental health. You cannot therapy your way out of poverty. You cannot therapy your way out of discrimination. And for those of you who are therapists here, and I know Tammy spoke about her one good adult was a therapist, but I guarantee you it wasn't just the therapy, it was a relationship. And I could tell that by the way that she spoke about that person, that was a warm relationship, a one good adult who happens to be a therapist, but you don't have to be. You have to be kind, caring, respectful. One of the things that I think about is when people come to us and they are upset and we feel totally de-skilled and totally overwhelmed, and we wonder if we make any impact in their lives. We wonder if the things that we're saying are having any effect. So sometimes you don't always reap the rewards of the seeds that you sow, because the person you're working with doesn't believe in themselves. But if you keep saying the same messages over and over and over again, it sticks. Your voice becomes an echo that echoes across their lifespan, and they don't forget. So I'm really sorry, but some of you won't get to see the rewards of the seeds that you've sown, but you have to be patient because it's going to happen. So if you take me, for example, when I was a young person like Tammy, I came from a working class community. And when you live in a working class community, you experience stigma and discrimination because you live in social housing. Or like me, if you were raised by a single parent, my mother was an amazing human being who did a wonderful job. I think myself and my sister turned out just fine, but she had to work really hard. And she was one of my good adults. I didn't get to go to university because that's what happens when you come from a working class community. You can't go straight away. It comes in time. And I did go. But when I was there, I often didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel like I fitted in. And I regularly wanted to drop out. As well as having my mother as my good adult, I also had a teacher in secondary school who was an incredibly patient man. That word's doing a lot of lifting there. Because I pushed and pushed and pushed every boundary I possibly could. You could probably say I was actually quite unlovable. But he always told me that I was really bright, I was really clever, that I deserved to go to university, that one day I would, and that when I went I would flourish. So when I was in university and I thought about dropping out, I had that echo. The words that you say to your young people, they echoed in my head. So I started to believe that I could. And that's why I'm here now. So in the face of all of the challenges that we're experiencing and how we sometimes can feel overwhelmed, it is definitely not the time to give up now. There's never been a more important time to not give up. Young people are rights holders, but they don't have their rights met, often because they don't have access to power. We are people who have power. We are people who have privilege, and we can be the voice of young people. So now is not the time to give up. Now is the time to be disruptive and to advocate for change. If you think about the fact that there are 130 good adults in this room right now, and you think about the power of 130 good adults, what kind of change can we make? So what I'm asking you to do is to create a coalition of the willing. Use the next few days. You have access to new tools, but you also have access to all of the power that's in this room. And when you leave here, you will be able to advocate for change. So what I'd like to see is that we think about risk and protective factors for young people. So in psychology, we talk about risk and protective factors, and I've talked about some of the risk factors: discrimination, poverty. I've also spoken about one of the protective factors, which is one good adult. Another huge protective factor is education. And education is not just something that happens in classrooms. Education is something that happens in every interaction that we have with people that we work with, because we're always mentoring and we're always developing educational opportunities. So education can be formal, it can be informal, and it can be non-formal. And what we can do as well is we can advocate for educational spaces that are inclusive and that are trauma aware. So to give you an example of what I mean by trauma aware, when Tammy spoke earlier and she said that when the good adults came to her and said, you know, we want to be there, and she told them to fuck off. And I've worked with lots of young people who said that to me. In fact, when I was a young person, I regularly said that myself. But I know that the young people I worked with, when they said that to me, they didn't say fuck off. They said, can you help me and do you love me? So what we have to do is we have to advocate for them and we have to be disruptive. Truly inclusive spaces that are respectful of everybody, irrespective of who they are, where they come from. So this isn't the end of what I have to say. If you look to your left and you look to your right, you are surrounded by power. You are surrounded by one good adults. And what I hope you will take from your experience here in our beautiful country is that we can start to move forward, and we absolutely have to, because young people are feeling very isolated and very concerned about their future. So it's our job to be disruptive. And I want your words not just to echo for the young people across their lifespans. I want those words to echo in places of power where people make policies, because the people that we serve deserve that. Thank you very much.